Hey, good evening. Good evening, good evening, good evening. Happy Monday to you. And thank you for joining. We had a little bit of a snafu there, but we are good and we are back on. I am Alessandra Perot. I am the owner and founder of Wild Center for Wellness. Hey, the Wellness Apothecary, Dr. Tiana, thank you for joining. And I am the self-care architect. And what that simply means is that I curate self-care experiences for high-achieving, high-performing Black women who are 40 and over. And these practices are deeply rooted in rest. And they are intended to create space for us to be, hey baby, how you doing? They are intended to create space so that we can be strengthened, healed, and empowered. And so one of the things that is empowering for us is to have conversation around rest, conversation around self-care, what that looks like, what that feels like, looking at ways that we can actualize self-care in our lives, right? So that it's not just something that we talk about. It's not just theory, but we have some practical tips on how we can engage self-care in a way that's really meaningful and impactful in our lives. I can tell you that there was a time when my life was so busy. I was doing so many things. I was responsible for so much that self-care certainly, while I thought it was a priority, while I wanted it to be a priority, it often was not. You know, it would often slip to the bottom of the list if it stayed on the list at all. So this evening, I thought, let's talk about time, right? I say often, make time to rest, secure time to rest, block off time to rest. And if you are like how I was at one point, it's like, are you serious? Right? Where in the world am I supposed to get or find more time when I feel like I don't have time to do all the things that I'm supposed to do as it stands now? Right? Does that sound familiar at all? Right? It's like, what the hell are you talking about? Where am I supposed to get this time from? So we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about the truths around time, and we will talk about some tips as it relates to time and rest. So let's dig into the truths first, right? And some of these truths, you let me know if they resonate with you, right? Some of them, it'll be like, oh yeah, I get that. And some of them, they might feel like, like I'm tapping on your window and I'm peeking into your space. So truth number one, time is what time is, right? It is what it is. We have 24 hours in a day, however many minutes that is, however many seconds that is. Every single day, it doesn't matter whether it's a weekday or a weekend, we have the same amount of time. The next truth is that our time obligations, they differ from person to person. And even as an individual, your time can differ from day to day and from moment to moment. And as you see me looking over to the side, it's just, this is where I've got all of my notes just over to my left. I guess that would be your right. And so our time obligations, they differ. The things that are required of me and of my time are very different from the things that are required of you and the ways in which you fill your time. The next truth, there are some things as it relates to time, that are non-negotiable, right? They are things that they just are, and we really don't have the latitude to make a lot of changes. And when we think about these things that are non-negotiable, I group them into two categories. They are things that we ourselves have determined to be a non-negotiable, or they are things that we have allowed someone else to decide for us as being non-negotiable. So examples of allowing someone else to decide what is negotiable or non-negotiable as it relates to our time might be our employers, right? If they say this is what we've got to do and we've agreed that this is what we've got to do, then we're allowing, if you will, someone else to make decisions about our time. Our family members, if you are caring for a loved one, if you have children that you have responsibility for, getting them from place to place, caring for them, whatever it might be, other obligations in your family, that is an allowance of others to manage or dictate your time. Another truth is that we often have blind spots when it comes to the truth about our time, right? There are often things that we are unable to see because we are in the midst of doing the things, and because we are doing it, it can be difficult to see, right? It's just like when you're driving your car, you are going and then something comes into a spot that you are unable to see. You're busy going where you're going. You're looking in all the directions, but by just the very nature of the way that your car is built and the way that the car next to you is built, you're unable to see it. Likewise with our time, by the very nature of what you're doing, you are unable to see where there might be some opportunities. The next truth is that we can be inflexible when it comes to our time, right? We get so used to things being a particular way that it comes back in a way to the blind spot, that we not really trying to hear that we might be able to do something different, right? This is the way that we've done it. This is the way that we like doing it. And the idea of thinking about doing it in a different way doesn't appeal to us. And so we can really dig our feet into any kind of changes that might be necessary for us to make time for rest or anything else for that matter. The next truth is that not only can we be inflexible, not only can we have blind spots, but we can also get really defensive about how we fill our time. We can get defensive about how we spend our time, right? The next truth is that sacrifice, negotiation, and prioritization are required in order to be able to do the things that you want to do and to do the things that you need to do. Sacrifice, negotiation, and prioritization are required to be able to manage your time in such a way that you are able to do the things that you want and the things that you need to do. Next truth, making the time to rest is far more efficient, manageable, timely, and economical compared to when your body, your mind, your heart forces you into rest because of exhaustion, stress, and their sequela, right? So what does that mean? We can save a whole lot of time, a lot of things if we make the time, we find the time to be able to give ourselves an opportunity to rest compared to when your body shuts you down. I remember when folk used to say, you better sit down somewhere before God makes you sit down, right? Because we don't listen to the messages that our body is giving to us. And as a result, when we don't hear it anymore, what happens? Your body then takes a posture where it says, okay, we're going to have to start shutting some things down so that we can get the rest that we need. Some of us, because we have so much going on in the level of exhaustion that we experience, or the amount of stress, and then the things that happen because of the cumulative effect of stress on our bodies and on our minds, sometimes we can find ourselves hospitalized for whatever the thing might be, right? And so the truth is that more often than not, this is not always the case. This is not an all or nothing. And, I can't tell you what the science says, but this is what my hunch tells me, and from my own experience and watching so many others, that when we do the work of resting, even if resting is resting once a week for however long we're going to rest, whether it's 15 minutes or 30 minutes or 5 minutes, being intentional about inviting rest into our space can dramatically shift negative outcomes because of us not resting. So those are some of the truths when it comes to our time and rest, right? All of these things are happening in the background and in the foreground when it comes to us saying, okay, let me figure out where I might have some time to be able to self-care, where I might be able to find or make some time to be able to get some much needed rest. When it comes to saying, let me see if I can find a minute just to pause. So now let me give you some tips that can be helpful for you. And you let me know what resonates. You let me know if you've tried any, and if you have any other tips that you'd like to offer as it relates to time and rest. So the first tip that I would offer correlates to the first truth that I offered. And that first truth, if you remember, is that time is what it is, right? So the first tip is to accept that time is what it is, right? There is no need in wishing that we had more time. I can't tell you how many times I've said, God, if I had more time, geez, I wish I had more time to do X, Y, and Z, right? And even just saying that ends up being a waste of time because I can't do anything to change the amount of time that actually exists. And yeah, we could get into this whole idea that time is a construct and all of that. That's a whole different conversation for another time. We're talking about operating off of 24 hours in a day and how we use that time. So accepting the fact that time is what it is, right? No need in debating it, no need in wishing for it to be different because it simply is. The next tip is that you can, hey Chandra, how you doing? Good evening, is to consider tracking your time. When I was working with my business coach and I was talking about time management and feeling like just time was getting away from me, one of the things that she had me do was to track my time, right? And track your time for several days during the week, and then also tracking your time on the weekends so that you can get a really good idea of how and where you're spending your time, right? From the time you get up to the time you go to sleep, all of the things that you do, right? You don't have to be super detailed, like, you don't have to give the details of what you're doing when you're going to the bathroom, but it might be, bio break. You would write down, in the morning for me, it would be my meditation prayer, getting ready for the day, right? And you document what you're doing throughout the course of the day, right? And the truth about that tip is that it requires a level of honesty on our parts, right? Not trying to hide anything, not trying to gloss anything over, but it requires that you are really honest about what you're doing with your time, how you are filling your time for that particular day, so that you are able to see where there might be opportunity. So the next tip is to ask someone that you know and trust to look at your calendar to determine or to see where there may be potential opportunities of time to be able to self-care and rest, right? So in order to do that, it requires that we really fully complete our calendars for someone to be able to do this. So for me, it would look something like putting what I'm doing in the morning when I first wake up, my morning self-care rituals, meditation, those things that I'm doing for my mind and for my spirit, right? And then everything thereafter, you know, when I go to eat breakfast, if that's 30 minutes, if that's an hour, then any meetings that I have, any clients that I have, if I'm scheduling breaks, if I've got doctor's appointments, if I'm taking my parents to a doctor's appointment, that includes the things that you do on a regular basis, your date nights, your girls' nights, if you have to do something for your children or for something else. Because again, right, it's about being honest about those things that fill our calendar so that the person that you are trusting to look at your calendar and help you to be able to identify where there might be opportunity for you to be able to take time to rest, they need to be able to have all of that information. Otherwise, it makes it difficult, right? And so we want to be able to give them the opportunity to look at the fullness of the picture as possible. And so once we do this, then the tip, when they come back to share with us what it is that they see, the tip that I would suggest is to record that conversation. Record the conversation. Record the conversation. You might say, now, Alessandra, why would I record the conversation? Well, it goes back to some of the truths. Some of the truths are that we get very defensive when it comes to our time and our calendars. The truth is that we can be inflexible when it comes to our time and our calendars. And so we may not be in a position to be able to hear what that person has to offer us and to share with us about our time and our calendar. So if we record it, we can go back and listen where, okay, that first time, you know, it was a little rough. And the second time when we go to listen to it, we may be better able to hear what's actually being said. So I remember when I was working with my trainer, and there were so many times that she would say, why do you work so many hours? Right? And I would always say, I have so many patients, we have so many responsibilities, responsibilities to employees. Like I would always have a response and answer as to why I work so many hours. I always had a response about why I couldn't take more time for myself, right? And I really was always on the defense whenever she asked me a question, whenever she would encourage me to do something different with my time management. And it wasn't until I was away from her and not in that immediate conversation that I could sit back and reflect about, you know, she has a point, right? Why am I working so many hours, right? When you don't feel like the spotlight is directly on you, right? Even though we know that the person is not, you know, going like this to you and is not intending to do or say anything that will be hurtful, but instead is intending to shed light to create space for you so that you can do something so life-giving and life-affirming for yourself. So that tip is to record the conversation when the person that you trust comes to you with their reflection and their observation about where you might have some pockets of time in your day or your weekend or both to be able to rest and self-care. The next tip is to look for small pockets of time, right? Oftentimes when we think about self-caring, we think about needing hours of time to be able to do that, right? And while in a different world, I can't even say a perfect world, in a different world, maybe that would be the case for many of us. But as it stands, for most of us, that is not the way that it is. So I would encourage you to look for smaller pockets of time, right? Instead of looking for an hour or 2 hours or a half a day, look for where you might be able to find 5 minutes of time to slow down and pause. Look for where you might have 10 or 15 minutes of time. That is often far more manageable than looking for an hour, right? And trying to figure out how you can shift so many things around for 60 minutes. Instead, look for those smaller pockets of time. It's very similar to, I think about how, the recommendation at some point, I believe it still is for many of us, is to get 30 minutes of exercise for at least 5 days a week. So 150 minutes of exercise per week. And many people will tell you, you don't have to do all 30 minutes at one time. You could do 15 minutes in the morning, 15 in the evening. Maybe you split it into threes, 10 in the morning, 10 at lunch, and 10 in the evening, right? So we don't have to get it all at one time. But what I will tell you is that 5 minutes of self-caring, 5 minutes of rest is far more powerful than getting none and running yourself down. Because typically what happens is, once you get used to that 5 and you're like, oh, that 5 is feeling good to me, then you start inching up to 10. Then you start inching up to 15, right? And then you begin to seriously carve out that time as non-negotiable time. So that's the next tip. Choose smaller blocks of time. The next tip is to schedule that time in your calendar. And when I say schedule it, I'm saying if you need to name it, like if other people have access to be able to see the details of your calendar, then name it some important meeting, right? Conference call with so-and-so. Mark it as busy. Mark it as non-negotiable time, right? Because as soon as we make it like, if I get to it, then I get to it, more often than not, what happens is we don't get to it. So make it non-negotiable time. Put it onto your calendar, name it, make it something sounding really important so that if other people have to have access to your calendar, they're not trying to move your stuff around. All right. Our next tip is along the same vein as choosing smaller blocks. You don't have to try to get it in every day. If you could, that would be great. But if you can only get it in once a week, that is great, right? That's the reality of your life at this time. So get it in for once a week. And don't feel bad that one time a week for 5 minutes was all that you were able to do. Honor the fact that you were able to get it in once this week for 5 minutes. Give gratitude for the fact that you were able to discipline yourself and carve out 5 minutes of time for yourself. And then the last tip that I would offer is to consider alternative times, right? Oftentimes we're looking for the beginning or the end of the day, or we're looking for some other, special time. But maybe the alternative time is using your lunch break for your self-care, for your rest. Maybe it is while you are waiting for your children to finish with instrument practice or sports practice, or while they are, doing whatever it is that they're doing, you consider using that time. Consider the time before everybody else gets up, or the time before you begin any other thing, right? And, I will say that when it comes to resting, it can be difficult to do that first thing in the morning, right? Not necessarily the most ideal time, but while it may not be resting, you can do another form of self-care, right? First thing in the morning. When you're first waking up, it is easy to go right back to sleep if you're trying to rest. And you can begin to feel resentful if that happens. So first thing in the morning might not be the best time for you, right? You find some other form of self-care that is nourishing for your body, for your mind, for your spirit. So those are the truths and the tips around time and rest. Let me know what resonates with you. Let me know those things that you've tried, you've found to be effective, and those things that for you did not find to be helpful at all. So that's all I've got for truths and tips. I do want to give you an opportunity to feel rest in your body. And so we are going to do a short practice because we have actually been on for not quite 30 minutes, but approaching that. And I want to honor the fact that time is so important, right? And I know that I am not the only thing that you are doing. You have other things that you need to finish up for the evening. So I want to at least show you a setup that you can take to rest in. And this particular setup is a supported, reclined, bound angle. It will be a restorative posture. And it is one that, for me, I like to take in the morning. It is a way for me to symbolically open to my day, to open my heart, to open my mind, and to open my body to all that is available to me in the day, so that I can meet the challenges, I can meet the opportunities, I can meet the whatever that is ahead of me for the day. So I'm just going to shift the camera back so that I can show you what this looks like with respect to your setup. So you do not need yoga props. That's what I say all the time. You can use the things that you have in your house. I still have a bolster on my mat. I'm just going to shift that off so that you can see what it looks like. So one of the things that you need is to create an incline for yourself. This will be where your torso finds rest. And I am just going to use a couple of pillows from off of my bed to stack to begin to create the incline. And then I happen to have one of these kind of lumbar pillows. It is relatively soft. So what I'll do is, once I create the shape, then I'll look for a way to bolster it. And the thing that I will do, like you can see right here how it just kind of drops in, I'm going to use a blanket. Now granted, these are my yoga blankets, but you could use any blanket or a towel because those are a bit more stiff. I am going to place that behind so that it doesn't have as much space to dip in. Once you've got that, you can essentially test it out. You'll come to sit in front of it with your rear end snuggling up against that. And you can bend your knees, bring the soles of your feet to the mat, hands come to the outside of your hips, and use the strength of your arms to help lower you. And you can feel that support. You could also use a cushion off of your couch. You could use another pillow, a couple of pillows from your bed to help create the support for your back. And even though this isn't the most rigid base, I still can sense some opening through my chest. I can feel the space that my shoulders have to kind of drape back in space. And it does feel comfortable for me, right? It feels supported. But you keep making those adjustments until you get there. The next part of the shape is the bound angle. And simply put, it is bringing the inner edges of your feet to touch and then allowing your knees to splay open. But we don't just allow the knees to splay open, right? Even if your knees can do it with great ease. For many of us, we have some tightness and some resistance in the inner thighs and in our hips. And even if we don't, we're still going to use some supports. So if you remember with restorative yoga, we are using lots of props to support, to hold, to cradle our bodies so that our bodies are able to relax into. Our bodies are able to find a sense of support. Our bodies are able to let go. And once we are able to do that, then this ability to rest begins to enter in, right? We're able to shift from this act of doing to this space of being, the space of allowing, the space of opening. So when we open the knees, allow the knees to splay open, you can use blankets, you could use pillows. You will fold them and prop them in such a way so that the knees are lifted and the legs are supported so that there is no stress on the inner thighs, no stress on the hips. The soles of your feet come to touch. And what that looks like, I'll get into position here, is something like this, right? We have the incline behind us. I have support under my knees and under my thighs. Hands come to the outside of the knees. And then recline back. You can determine if you need some support behind the head and the neck. Even see how your arms and your hands feel. For me, this feels good. It also feels good to me to open my arms out like a wider V. And instead of rolling the back of my palms to the mat or even rolling my palms to the mat, it feels even more comfortable to kind of allow my arms to roll in such a way that I roll to the outer edges of the outer blades of my hands, so the pinky finger side of each of my hands. And then make any adjustments that you need, right? Give yourself permission to say, you know what, this doesn't feel quite right. This doesn't feel super supportive. Give yourself permission and allow yourself patience to be able to make the adjustments until you get it just right. And then the last thing that I would offer is to cover yourself. Cover yourself so that you're good and warm. If you've got socks for your feet, put those socks on to cover your feet. Get a blanket or two to cover your body. Make sure you're nice and warm and cozy, and you can tuck that blanket in around you. And to make it even nicer, if you're comfortable with being in darkness, certainly turning down your lights or turning off the lights, using an eye bag or an eye pillow, or an eye mask to cover your eyes, or you can even take a blanket or a towel to cover your eyes or your face to darken out any outside light. And all of those things, as you begin to layer them, right? And as you begin to practice more and more, you can just practice with this shape for a few times. The hope, the intention is to allow your body this place of familiarity. Because sometimes what happens is that resting feels very unfamiliar to us, right? When we think about time and resting, a lot of times we make up reasons and we get defensive about making any changes in our schedules as it relates to our time because we are uncomfortable with the idea of being still. We are uncomfortable with the idea of being quiet. And so allow yourself that space, right? That's why sometimes 5 minutes is good, right? If you are not used to being still, if you are not used to being quiet, if you are not used to just being with yourself, 30 minutes can be quite intimidating. So I guess I would add another tip. We've talked about using those shorter blocks of time. Start off with a smaller block of time so that it is less intimidating to you. So that's all I've got today. Try out the reclined bound angle Supta Baddha Konasana, actually Shalamba Supta Baddha Konasana. Give it a try, see how it feels in your body. Start with 5 minutes and then allow yourself to progress. Maybe you go up to 15 minutes. And the thing about it is that, you have this support underneath your knees and underneath your thighs, so we don't have a lot of stress on those hip joints. Let me know how it feels in your body. Let me know what you think about the truths and the tips. And I look forward to being with you again next Monday. And we'll see what we talk about. Keep watch. Sometime this month, we will restart Winter Rest, where there will be 4 sessions of restorative yoga we practice in community, and the theme will be around winter. So thank you so much for your presence. I appreciate you. I hope that you have a good evening, that you have restful sleep, and that tomorrow is kind to you, and that you're able to do the things that you want to do and the things that you need to do. So until we meet again, may you be strengthened, may you be healed, and may you be empowered. Take good care.